Is your name Zozo?
Zozo. Zozo. Zozo the clown. That is so creepy. What the?
Monica, what are you doing?
Hey!
Monica!
What are you doing?
Oh my god, Monica! Monica, calm down!
In the-
What are you doing?
Welcome, dear viewer. I hope you are having a wonderful night. Tonight, I'll be telling some terrifyingly scary stories. I hope you are warm and ready. Let's begin. I was a sergeant in the U.S. Army in Etzing, getting out from the military when President Bush ordered more troops into Iraq in 2003. I had just returned home to Austin, Texas, when I was summoned into my local National Guard unit at Camp Mabry and told that I was being recalled to the Army. But the unit was already tasked out to deploy to Iraq. I was not part of their unit yet, so the commander offered to give me a waiver to deploy with a government contractor, Halliburton, in Houston. I knew that I would make more money as a contractor, so I took the offer. Not long after arriving in Kuwait at Camp Doha, I began working with the operations team, overseeing logistics affairs. We would oversee the daily convoy of supply between Kuwait and Baghdad, a route riddled with ED, incidents, small arms skirmishes, and almost constant breakdowns of Army and civilian vehicles. Because I was a saw gunner in the 1st Infantry Division while on active duty, and was technically still in the Guard, I was often in the convoys, manning a mounted weapon that accompanied the mostly civilian convoys. During these runs, we had a few strange encounters in an area south of Baghdad known then as Camp Babylon, occupied by French troops, but then designated an archaeological site for obvious reasons. Camp Babylon was set up in the area that was said to originally be inhabited by the famous Tower of Babel. Indeed, there were ruins there that did look like a massive structure once stood at that spot. I had 2 strange incidents happen to me while passing through there. The first incident seems a bit benign, but it sets the mood for the second. We were passing through Camp Babylon in the afternoon one day, when our convoy took small arms fire. The SOP, at the time, standard operating procedure, was to stop the convoy and return fire. This was because, in the past, such incidents ended up being a long gunman attempting to scare the convoy into running into it. IDE is on the road. Because of this, the SOP changed to stop the convoy, dismount, and return fire. While engineers looked for explosive devices on the road, we scanned the horizon for enemies. Nothing. They most likely fled immediately. However, the ruins around Camp Babylon were alive with shadow figures that seemed to move about the area. Several times, we would spot the figures, but they would immediately disappear. A contractor, lying beside me with his weapon, commented, "How odd that we are in the shadow of Babel and fighting the supernatural." I didn't respond, but I knew he was a 32nd degree Mason who was really into the arcane aspects of Babylon, etc. I didn't feel, at the time, that much was supernatural, but certainly I did see the shadowy and bizarrely small figures dart about the structures. Once the road was deemed clear, we continued on to Baghdad. The second incident occurred about a month later. At this point, the weather in southern Iraq and Kuwait had turned quite cold at night. During this encounter, we had just completed the supply run to Baghdad and were returning back to Camp Doha in Kuwait when a vehicle in our convoy broke down. Once again, we found ourselves right at Camp Babylon. While the Army mechanics took a look at the vehicle and the rest of us took up fighting positions around the area, strange things began to occur. It started with a strange light bobbing in the desert. Thinking it was a person with a flashlight, we used NVG's, night vision goggles, to watch. It was simply a glowing ball of light moving towards a set of ruins. After initial contact with the light, a few of us had moved forward away from the convoy to see what the source was. After seeing it was self-contained and not a person, we were a bit alarmed. Then we heard a sound that I will never forget. A long wailing began from one of the ruined structures or foundations not far away. It sounded like a woman in agony, mixed with loneliness. On and on, the sounds went while we huddled in the cold and dark, wondering what the hell we were listening to. With our NVGs equipped, we used our flashlights to spotlight the ruins. If you've ever done this, you will know that a normal flashlight with NVGs looks like a massive beam of light. We scoured the area, but no source of the wails or the ball of light were seen. About this time, we were told via radio that the vehicle was repaired and ready to roll, so we decided to return to the convoy. I was slinging my saw over my shoulder when I noticed my contractor partner was staring at the ruins in horror. He was frozen. I shook him and he snapped out of his stupor, quickly leaving the area with the rest of us. Once we were back at the camp, and it was pleasantly daylight the following morning, several of us were chatting about the encounter at Camp Babylon before our daily operations briefing. It was then that I remembered the terrified expression on the face of the contractor, so I asked him about it. He was still obviously traumatized by the event, but managed to explain that as we were leaving our position on the sandy hill, he saw a tall, black figure standing beside the ruins. It was watching us as we were looking for him, her or it. He said that he felt an instant wave of despair hit him and thought that he was going to die. He didn't remember leaving the area. His next memory was in the Humvee, headed back to Kuwait. I now write nonfiction books about haunted places for Llewellyn Publishing and have visited hundreds of reputedly haunted spots. But I'll never forget the wailing figure at the ruins of Babel. It's also worth noting that when I related this story to some of our Pakistani employees at Camp Doha and Camp Arif Jan, they were also quite horrified. One of them, a translator we called Artie, said that we had encountered a D-Jinn, or a damn spirit, and that we were lucky to be able to tell the tale. I agree. I have a story. It isn't mine, but it happened to my uncle. He used to tell this story when we went camping, and it scared the lights out of me every time I heard it. We live in Utah, and my uncle, Mark, went on a mission at 19. They sent him to an Indian reservation in Arizona. They paired him up with a companion named Carl. When they first got there was a huge rift with the locals on the reservation about their being there. They didn't want my uncle and Carl to stay on the reservation grounds. Eventually, they came to the compromise that they would stay on the outskirts in a trailer. This reservation wasn't very big and was located next to a heavily wooded area. The first night, they were trying to sleep when, all of a sudden, their trailer started to shake violently back and forth. Startled and not sure what was happening, they climbed under their table for cover. Mark could distinctively hear someone pushing it from both sides of the trailer, like a group of people. After about 5 minutes, it stopped. The next day, they made rounds on the reservation and were talking to the locals. Carl made a comment to one of the families that their trailer was shaking the night before. The family got very quiet and then told them they had to leave. They thought it was strange, but didn't think much of it. The next night, it happened again. They awoke to their trailer shaking back and forth. Again, they climbed under the table until it stopped. This went on for 2 more nights. Anytime they tried to talk to anyone about it, they got quiet and told them to leave. Mark started thinking that, due to the tension of their arrival, the locals were doing this to scare them off the reservation. They then went into a convenience store, and they were talking together about how frustrated they were with the situation. The clerk overheard and said, "They can't talk about it. It's forbidden." Confused. They ask him, "Can't we talk about what?" The guy continues to tell them about the skinwalkers. He says they are evil demons that were once Native American witches. If they talk about it, the skinwalkers will come for their souls. They just walked out of there, baffled. They thought it was another scare tactic. So that night, when the shaking started again, my uncle decided to be brave and confront them. He went to the trailer door, flew it open, and yelled, "Hey!" When he did that, he saw these 3 animals run off. 2 were wolves. 1 was a bear, but they looked strange, almost with human features. As he watched them run towards the trees, all 3 stood up on 2 legs and walked slowly towards the trees, making a human cackling laugh. It scared him so bad that they called their mission president the next morning and asked to be moved. They were relocated that day. For a year, nothing happened. One day, they announced that Carl was being relocated to another city and Mark was getting a new companion, Jimmy. They had to drive for about an hour to pick Jimmy up from the airport. The road they traveled went through the boundaries of the reservation. They arrived at about 8 p.m. and met Jimmy, and they went to leave. The mission president tells Jimmy, "We are driving through a dangerous area at night, so we can't make any stops. If you need to use the restroom, you need to go now," Jimmy says. "I am fine." The mission president gets serious enough to even freak out Mark. I am not kidding. Go do your business. Jimmy was insistent that he was fine. So they hit the road. As they were about 30 minutes into the drive, they were going through the area of the reservation boundaries, and Jimmy started complaining that he needed to pee badly. The mission president says, "We can't stop here. You'll have to hold it." Jimmy keeps going on. "I really can't hold it." So the mission president stops the car and says, "Okay, but you will do your business next to the door. And if I say get into the car, you has to get into the car. You better get into the car fast." With a look of confusion, Jimmy says, "All right," opens the door and starts to do his business. About 5 seconds later, the mission president says nothing and just yanks Jimmy into the car and floors it. Jimmy and Mark start freaking out. What is going on? The mission president says nothing and just increases his speed. All of a sudden, Mark sees something next to the car to his right. A giant wolf-looking man was running on 2 feet next to the car. Mark looked at the speedometer. They were going over 60 miles an hour and still increasing. The wolf creature kept right next to the car for 10 minutes until it finally took off into the trees. Shaking, Jimmy gets out of the car when they arrive. They didn't speak through the whole ordeal and says, "What did I just see?" The mission president says, "Next time I tell you to take care of your business, you take care of your business." An online film student named Jacob submitted a video that made me so horrified that I had to call the dean at 0 a.m. She advised me to turn the clip over to the police. I teach filmmaking at an art college in Maryland. During the lockdown in late 2020, my filmmaking course was online. My usual first assignment has the students film a setting. With an online class, the students just film around their houses. Most students were happy to show off their gaming setup and action figure collection. A student named Jacob put his camera on a tripod and filmed a dead oak tree in his backyard for about 5 minutes. For continuity editing, I normally have students film a chase sequence or a snowball fight. For online, students just filmed themselves cooking or playing with their pets. Jacob submitted a video of himself tying a noose. He then hung a mannequin on the same dead oak tree. I started to get creeped out, but I had put on a brave face. Horror and film students always go hand in hand. I don't want to appear like I was easily spooked. For the next assignment, Jacob submitted a clip of a man wearing a medieval jester costume and a smiling mask, dancing around the dead oak tree. It was in black and white and was beyond disturbing. I'm used to horror movies being submitted to me by students, but those were gory, wild, and fun. This clip was just eerie. After class, Jacob messaged me privately and asked if I was sick of seeing the same tree over and over. Against my preference, I said no. If he finds a muse that inspires him, then he should stick with it as long as he can. It felt like the right thing to say at the time. I found out from other professors that Jacob began incorporating the dead oak tree into all that he did. In photography class, he retouched a photo of a car crash onto a photo of the dead oak tree. In digital illustration class, he drew the dead oak tree with a bunch of people hanging from it. Meanwhile, an aspiring YouTuber named Matt asked me if he could submit a Let's Play for an assignment. I normally would say no, but because everybody was in home isolation at the time, I thought, why not? Just add a lot of narration. Matt then invited me to watch him play PUBG live on Twitch. When I did, I was amused to see that Jacob was one of his team members. I asked Matt after the stream how he knew Jacob. Matt said that Jacob was his neighbor, only a few houses down the road from him. Matt told me what happened to Jacob back when they were in middle school. Jacob was home alone, and a man knocked on the door, telling Jacob that he used to live in that house. The man asked his father to build him a tree house, and just when the father was about to finish it, he fell from the tree and broke his neck. It's been over 2 decades since he moved away, and the man told Jacob he just wanted to see the oak tree again. Jacob didn't let him inside, but said that he could go around and look at it in the backyard. Jacob played video games until his parents came home, where they found the man hanging from the tree. The semester after, in early 2021, Jacob wasn't taking any of my classes, but a cinematography professor video called me about one of Jacob's videos. The assignment was to light up a night scene, and Jacob just filmed a handheld POV shot of him circling around a tree with a flashlight. She told me she yelled at Jacob for submitting something like that instead of something more professional. Jacob logged off, and she wondered if she had made a mistake. Other students noticed Jacob's obsession with the dead oak tree as well, and started talking to me about it. They told me that Jacob also dropped out of all classes. A few days later, at about 11 p.m., Matt was live streaming, and I was watching him on Twitch. I was shocked to see Jacob burst through Matt's bedroom door. He was covered in cuts and bruises. Shards of glass were all over his body, and his shirt was soaked in blood. Fresh blood was still dripping down from his forehead. Matt fell out of his chair, screaming at the top of his lungs, rightfully freaking out. I'll give Matt credit for not cursing and chasing Jacob out of his room. Matt asked Jacob what was wrong. Jacob looked into the camera and asked if I was watching. He told me to check the video he submitted. There were about 20 people in the chat. Some of them were my students. I was a dependable student in the chat, asking her to call 911 and telling Matt to render basic first aid for Jacob. Just when I was about to call the police myself, I got a notification that someone had uploaded a large video file to our department's file storage. I opened it, and it was a video clip said to be uploaded by Jacob's username. It showed Jacob placing a camera on the back seat of his car. He turned from his driver's seat and stared into the camera. My mouth was wide open when I saw Jacob, who, without turning back around to face forward, just stepped on the gas and crashed into the dead oak tree. Last night, after trick, or treating, I had the most terrifying experience of my life. I'm a 42-year-old man, for your reference. It was about 10:30, and I was just hanging out watching TV. All of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. There was someone smashing my front door with their fist. I was instantly freaked out. I slunk down to see out the front windows, hiding behind my plants to try and not be seen. I live in a split-level house, so my living room is about 10 feet off the ground. I can't see anybody, but there is a black mid-size SUV in my driveway with its lights and hazards on. Being Halloween and having an active imagination, my mind automatically goes to horror movie scenes. This is when I realized my back patio door is difficult to lock most of the time and is unlocked. I creep into the basement to get a piece of wood to jam it shut. As I'm coming out of the basement, there's 2 loud bangs on the basement window along the side of my house. Half the basement is above the ground. Remember, it's a split level. I quickly run up and throw the wood to jam the sliding door shut, close the blinds, and creep back up the stairs, turning all the lights off on the way to the living area. As I'm tiptoeing back up and into the living room, I can see the car pulling out of my driveway, really slowly. About an hour later, all seems good, and I'm kind of calming down. I'm sitting on my couch with the lights off, watching TV. I see car lights come across my ceiling from pulling up my inclined driveway. I look out, and it's the black SUV again. Now I'm really scared. I grab my phone and call 911, thinking I'm about to be a next year urban legend. I'm on my knees, peering through the plants in my window, just watching. Nobody gets out. I can't see the make or license number. It's so dark. Just a black SUV with lights and hazards on. The SUV was pulled so far forward that their bumper was practically touching my front step slab. Like 4 from my front door. Nobody gets out. I can't see in the car. They just sit there. I'm on the phone with 911, telling them what happened earlier and what is happening now. The black SUV slowly reverses out of my driveway and leaves. About 20 minutes later, I see the deputy rolling through our subdivision. The subdivision is one way in, one way out. Very small and a little rural. As he's coming back down the road, I see my landlord going out, who lives next door, so I open my door to go out there and tell them both what's going on. When I open the door, there's a note taped to it that says, "Derek, we're going to kill you." I'm not Derek. I don't know a Derek, and I don't know why whoever was banging thinks Derek lives here. I double, check with the deputy and landlord, and tell them about the note and the other happenings. He calls for backup. They take the note and ask both me and my landlord a bunch of questions about who this Derek guy is. One of the deputies pulls me aside and starts asking, "Do I owe anybody money? Do I know anybody who would want to hurt me? I involved in any sort of love triangle?" No, no, and no. He says there will be a deputy in the area, and if anything happens, call 911. The landlord was just going out for mail and swears he has never rented a Derek, heard anything, seen anything, or done anything. Here's the really fucked up part. This morning I was in my office, which is where that patio door I jammed shut is. It was freezing cold in there. I opened the blinds and the sliding door was about 4 open, meaning someone had tried to open the door after I'd put the piece of wood in there to jam it shut. I told the landlord that he already has a better lock on mine and his patio door, and he built us both a better door jamb. I know this is long. Thanks for reading. I swear all of this is true and happened last night. Sonder. A word used to describe the profound feeling of realizing every stranger around you has a life as complex and important as your own. It's also the name of the town I grew up in. Sonder lies on the eastern coast of the UK, on the north side of England. If you reach Scotland, you've gone too far. But if you're in Scarborough, you've not gone far enough. It sits somewhere between there, though I don't think anyone could be more specific. You see, you can't find it on any map, printed or digital, new or old, color-coded or satellite imagery. There is no sign of this town existing at all. If you pay enough attention online, you'll find the odd few people mentioning the place, like this that you're reading right now. Like a whisper passing by in a busy place, you only know it's there if you're looking for it. Yet to a vast majority of the world, Sonder is just a word. I was born there and raised within its confines. I moved away at 15, about 10 years ago. It was a peaceful seaside village, the type where everyone knows each other. This is the type where, when someone hosts a together, all residents are invited. It was a close-knit community. I still remember it with mostly fond memories. The waves lapped onto the sand all through the night. The cobbled streets scorched your bare feet as you walked back from the beach on a summer's day. The dark woods that overlooked the town from High Hill. High Hill is what we called the hill that stood next to Sonder. It blocked any chance of a view of other towns or cities. We resided in a valley at the edge of the sea, and while we liked it there, it felt very secluded. The town had a few small businesses. My favorite was Uncle Pete's Pizza. Everyone called him Uncle Pete, although he wasn't actually anybody's uncle, but his pizza place was perfectly between our home and my mom's pub. Every Friday, she would pick up a pizza on the way home. Absolutely no exceptions. Me and my older brother, Jacob, were always excited for this. Much of the town had been there for generations, and the population naturally got smaller as more and more of it became family. But a few people would move there every now and then. All of them found the town in the same way. A leaflet coming through the letterbox while searching for somewhere to move to. Every single time, the same story. They were driven here by a house moving service. I guess with no directions or map, it would be difficult to make your own way here. They were lovely. They really helped us, they would always say. Nobody ever really seemed to question it much. I mean, it's not like we were trapped. We could leave whenever we wanted. Make no mistake, Sonder was no prison. It didn't even feel like one. It's just difficult to find, and leaving just felt icky. Like you shouldn't do it. As the internet became mainstream, it became more and more obvious to people that the town was so hard to find. Suddenly, people had friends from outside of Sonder, but they could never visit because they could never seem to find their way in. The GPS signal was weak, and opening any app on your phone that tracked your location wouldn't pinpoint you. One truly odd thing about Sonder were the appliances. All of them had the same logo somewhere, the letter V in a circle. Since leaving, I've tried to research this company, but to no avail. The moving company that people arrived at also had this logo on their vans. The town had its issues, none more known than the Scream Singers. At night, if you listened hard enough, you could hear them, a chilling, soft sound. It was almost like a distant scream, yet more melodic, something enchanting yet fills you with dread. Nobody ever saw them, but someone in the town would go missing every now and then, maybe once or twice a year. Some lived alone and hadn't been seen in a few days before anyone realized. Some were cuddled up to their partner in bed, only for their partner to wake up with them no longer in their arms. The only thing they had in common was that there was never any sign of entry or struggle. My entire life, I've known the echoes over the valley to mean trouble, but my mother used to tell me stories of when the townsfolk thought they meant hope, a simpler time. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly when people made the connection between the disappearances and the whistles of the night, but they would always start a few weeks before a disappearance and stop the night after someone had gone missing. This had always intrigued me, but not as much as it did for my brother. Jacob found it fascinating, perhaps because he had never had someone close to him taken and didn't understand the pain. To him, it was just a mystery, wrapped in questions. Some believed the Scream Singers to be the ones taking these people. Some believed their calls to be a warning that something darker was coming. Whatever people believed their intentions to be, everyone knew that their somber singing over Sonder was only bad news. My fond memories of the town become clouded when the trauma of my final few days there enters my mind again. Years of therapy have helped me cope, but I feel talking about it publicly is the final thing that may bring me peace. As far as I know, I am the only person to have seen a Scream Singer, or at least the only living person. It was the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the 21st of June. Sonder has always held a small festival on this day. It dated back almost a century at the time, being the 97th consecutive solstice celebration. The festival took place not during those long sunlight hours, but as the sun began to set and the longest day ceased, at about 9:30 p.m. But the town of Sonder felt more melancholy than usual, especially for the festivities that were going on. The Scream Singers had started their wails again about 3 weeks prior, getting louder and louder each passing night. Sure enough, about an hour after the festival began, you could faintly hear the noises again, piercing through the sweeter melodies of the festival and the chatter of the crowds. People tried to ignore it and continue the celebrations, but every time the wind blew in just a particular way to make the noises more prominent, you could see the look on everyone's faces. The unspoken, silent fear was washing through the crowds like a wave. My mom's pub, really our family pub, was right at the festival. As such, the doors were wide open and people kept coming in and out. It was always one of the busiest nights of the year. Me and Jacob were sitting and drinking red wine. He was 17 and had a proper glass, but I still had half a lemonade in mine. It was the only night of the year I was allowed to drink alcohol. The festival was still going strong when Jacob had the idea to go a little out of town and get a better listen to the Scream Singers. I was hesitant, but I was always up for an adventure. So, half reluctantly, I agreed. We got a few streets away before the howling became louder than the music. We were standing in the perfect mix of the unknown on one side and enjoyment on the other. We should not have kept going. But we did. We reached the final building before the cobbled streets turned to grass and mud, and we didn't stop there. Without saying a word to each other, it was like we knew what we wanted to do. We wanted to be the first people to have seen the Scream Singers, and the first to understand them. We didn't know that only one of us would catch a glimpse. High Hill was steep, but not too steep. You didn't need your hands to climb it. It just took a lot of energy. Every now and then, we looked back at Sonder. You would almost think it was a ghost town from how dark it looked, if not for the bright festival right in the center. The only clue of any life, all packed together. The sounds of cheering, singing, and music echoed up the hill. All the while, the sounds of ghostly wails echoed down. A battle between good and evil, not seen but only heard. As we reached the dark woods, we looked at each other. It felt like we hadn't spoken in ages, so I broke that. We're really doing this. Jacob nodded. I knew he would. I just needed to say something. Hearing nothing but ghastly screeches was driving me insane. We wandered around in there for what seemed like forever, though it was closer to maybe 5 minutes. Every slight crunch made me flinch and turn around. There was never anything there but the haunting screams that were all around us. We reached a clearing, and the sounds of the screams seemed louder than ever. In the center of the clearing was a rock, about as tall as me and a little wider. Jacob held me, as he could clearly tell I was scared. It's all right. It's just sounds. There's nothing to be afraid of. Maybe we should head back. His words didn't comfort me. They only told me one thing. He couldn't see what I could see. Stood on the rock is something I will never get out of my mind. A tall, gray figure. I'm about twice as tall as any human I've ever seen. It had 2 arms, but only one hand. The hand it had looked what I can only describe as twisted. Its fingers were weaved together in a way that didn't make sense, and certainly wasn't natural. The shape of it was overall humanoid, but the proportions were all wrong. It had no eyes, at least not at first. I was terrified looking at this thing, but the moment my heart truly dropped was when eyes appeared. They slowly came out of its skin. There was no evidence that this creature should even have eyes. There were no holes for them, but as its face opened in a mesmerizingly disturbing way, I saw 2 eyes slowly come forward. The face closed again, the eyes looking right at us. There were only 2 eyes. I counted them. 1, 2. Its face opened up again as it let out a horrific scream. I ran. I ran faster than I ever have before in my life, only occasionally looking behind me to make sure Jacob was running with me. He was, but he wasn't running from the Scream Singer. He was only running to catch up with me. He had no idea why I was so scared at that moment. We ran all the way down High Hill, nearly tripping over. Running down a steep hill is difficult at the best of times. As we got back onto the cobbled streets, I turned around and looked up at the woods. There was no sign of anything chasing us, but the screams were still so loud, even down here. By this point, Jacob had caught up and was right beside me. He kept asking why I was running, but I was too shocked to answer him yet. We ran down another street, and he reached out to hold me. I stopped running, and I let him hug me. He told me that whatever I saw was going to be okay and that we were safe. I closed my eyes, tears streaming down my face. I opened my mouth and began to explain what I saw, getting words out between choking on my tears. It was this gray thing on the rock. You could see the rock, right? Well, on top. I realized the howling had stopped. I opened my eyes. Jacob wasn't there. I was standing in the middle of the street with my arms out, hugging nobody. I looked to my right and could see the festival. I felt empty and confused. I walked through the crowd, tears still streaming down my face. I found my mother at the bar, and she asked me where I had been and if I knew where Jacob was. I told her everything, and she closed up for the night. We both knew that the Scream Singers had claimed their next victim. She wasn't angry at me for going to the woods. She held me tight, and neither of us spoke a word. We just wept and wept until we were too tired and empty to weep anymore. The next day was Friday. I got out of bed in the morning after absolutely no sleep. My mom was downstairs, packing boxes. She told me we were leaving that same day. Within an hour, we were in her car, driving away from home. We passed Uncle Pete's Pizza. I realized this was the first Friday in my life that we weren't eating from there. As we drove further away from the sea, and I saw outside of that small town for the first time, I already knew that leaving our lives behind would not fix anything. Sonder is still out there. I hope somebody can find it.